Hi, and welcome to the next part of the Scrappy Handbag Crochet Along. We are going to be doing 4 stitches today just because I was traveling last week. I didn't get a video out, so I wanted to make sure to give you guys a good chunk of work to work on. So we are going to be doing, starting with this yellow, the waistcoat stitch, the single crochet herringbone. The pink is a combo of the shell and granny, and then the white is just a mixture of mostly half double crochets and some single crochets to flatten out the top for when we start the next stitch next week. Let's just get right into it. As always, if you have any questions, please be sure to drop them below. Okay, so here is my finished bag. Last week we finished with the berry stitch and with the wave stitch. So this week we're going to be doing the waistcoat stitch, the single crochet herringbone stitch, a combo of the shell and granny stitch, and then another row just to flatten it all out. So these 4 stitches and rows are what we're covering today. So first up is the waistcoat stitch. So I'm just tying in to the first stitch of the row. Please note that I did size up to a 5mm hook because with waistcoat stitch, I usually tend to keep a tighter tension, which caused my bag not to be a perfect rectangle. So I just sized up a hook. I would recommend doing this if you do have tight tension, but it's not completely necessary. And then the first row is single crochets all the way across. So we're not doing anything fancy for this first row. We're setting up the waistcoat stitch by doing single crochets in each stitch all the way across. Again, make sure your tension is not too tight, and I will meet you at the end. So I finished my last single crochet, so we're going to turn our project. And now for the waistcoat stitch, we're going to start by chaining 1. And then we want to do a single crochet, but we have to insert it between the kind of V of the previous single crochet. So in between those 2 legs, you can see me pointing out this space. And it comes out the V of the single crochet on the other side. And this is going to create kind of that knit-like pattern. So make sure you're working into that specific space in your single crochet, but it's just single crochets. It's just where you're inserting your needle that is specific for this stitch. So see, it creates this nice little knit-like structure with a bunch of V's. Looks good from both sides. So we're just going to continue this all the way down, making sure to insert your hook into that middle section for each of the single crochets, and I will meet you at the end. So I finished my second row, and I'm going to do 1 more row, but you can see that it's turning out nice and turning into that waistcoat special like knit-like texture. And again, we're going to work into the same area when we turn our project again. So start by chaining 1. And then you're going to work into that space between the legs of your single crochet, and you want to make sure it comes out the back between the V. So into the legs, out the V in the back. Single crochet. In the legs, out the V in the back. Single crochet. And I am doing 3 rows total, so this will be my last row of this. It's completely up to you how many rows you would like to do. Important thing with this stitch is the placement of where your hook goes in and making sure that your tension is not too tight. So I'm just going to finish off this 3rd row and I'll show you what it looks like. So here is what 3 rows of the waistcoat stitch looks like for me. Again, you can do as many rows as you'd like. I'm just going to stop at 3 rows. So I'm just going to pull my loop loose and then cut and secure my ends. And then we will move on to our next stitch in this video, which is going to be our single crochet herringbone. So similar to all the previous stitches, we're just going to tie into the first stitch. Again, I'm still using the 5mm hook because this is another stitch where my tension tends to be a little tighter. So I'm just sizing up a hook. You're going to start by chaining 1, and then we're going to set it up with just a single crochet into the next stitch. So what is important about the single crochet herringbone is before you do the single crochet, you want to insert your hook into that bottom loop or leg of your previous single crochet and then complete the single crochet. So you'll have 3 loops on your hook, it'll look like. So insert into that bottom loop or leg, insert into the next stitch, pull loop through, yarn over through, pull through all 3. So it's the same thing as a single crochet, it's just you're inserting into that previous stitch's bottom loop or leg before completing it. And that is your single crochet herringbone stitch. So you're going to repeat this all the way across. Again, make sure your tension is not too tight with this, just because of the nature of the stitch. I feel like it does have a tighter tension, and we want to make sure our project stays nice and square. So if you do notice your tension being tighter and it pulling in, I would recommend pulling the row out and restarting with a larger hook, or just being more conscious with your tension when you're doing this stitch and the previous waistcoat stitch. So you'll just repeat that herringbone all the way across, and I'll meet you at the end. So I finished my first row all the way across, and we're gonna flip and turn our project and do a second row. So you're going to start by chaining 1, similar to the last row. So chain 1, and then you're going to do a single crochet into the first stitch, and then that sets up your herringbone. So insert into the bottom loop or leg of the previous single crochet and complete a single crochet into the next stitch. Insert your hook into the bottom loop or leg, complete a single crochet in the next stitch. So it's the same exact stitch pattern you did in the first row. I just showed you how to set it up for row number 2. So just make sure, again, that you're going through that bottom loop or leg before completing your next single crochet in the next stitch. And you will repeat this all the way across, and I will meet you at the end. So I have the initial chain 1 left, so I'm going to insert into the bottom loop or leg and insert into that initial chain 1 and pull through for the single crochet to make sure I don't forget that last stitch. And that is the end of the single crochet herringbone stitch. Again, if you want to do a third, fourth row, you can definitely do that. I'm just going to leave it at 2. You can see me stretching out my project because even though I did size up a hook, I felt like my tension was maybe a little bit tight, so I'm just stretching it out to make sure that I still have that nice square rectangular shape and that a row is not like tight too much. So here is what it looks like finished so far on my finished side. Again, making sure that it's keeping a nice square shape. So next up is the shell and granny stitch combo. Don't mind my daughter's breakfast coming in frame for a second there. As always, we are going to tie into the first stitch of the row. Make sure your finished side is facing up. And then we are going to start by inserting our hook and pulling a loop through. And again, I need to switch back because this is not a tight tension stitch, so I'm switching back to the original 4mm hook. My bad on that. So again, I tied in, inserting my hook, pulling a loop through, chaining 1, that's going to serve as a single crochet. Then we are going to skip 1, 2 stitches and into the third stitch we are going to do a shell stitch, which is 5 double crochets. So skip 2, so into the third stitch from your hook we are going to do 5 double crochets into that stitch to create our first shell. So there's 3, 4, 5. So that's our first shell, just stretching it out a little bit. And then next we're going to do a granny stitch. So we're going to skip 1, 2, 3, and then in the next stitch we are going to do a granny stitch, which is 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to skip 3 stitches and go back to the shell stitch, which again is 5 double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you should be sensing a pattern. We are going to skip 3 stitches and do the granny stitch next. So 3 double crochets. And that's what you're going to repeat all the way across for this stitch. So just finishing up this granny, crochet number 2, double crochet number 3, and I'll show you what it's looking like. So you're alternating between the shell stitch and the granny stitch, and skipping 3 in between, except that just that initial one you only skip 2 after the chain 1. So repeat this across, and I'm going to let you know how to handle the end. So the end, it's completely dependent on how long you made your initial chain. So I just finished my granny stitch, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then my 5th is the last stitch of the row. So I have 4 stitches left. So that is how many stitches I can put into my next shell. So here again, I'm skipping 3, and I'm putting 4 stitches into this stitch instead of 5 because I don't have enough space with the number of stitches left. And then I'll end with a single crochet in the last space. So kind of the math behind this. So we have our granny stitch, and the middle double crochet of the granny stitch is the stitch count for where that granny stitch is. So then I have an extra stitch, and then I need 2 more stitches before and 2 more stitches after to finish up the stitch count for the row, which is why I needed to do 4 stitches in that last shell, not 5, so that I could still do a single crochet in the last stitch of the row. If you need extra help on this, shoot me a message, comment below. It's a little bit more confusing, but I didn't have enough space for the 5, so I needed to just do 4. Okay? Cool. So we are all done with the shell and granny stitch. It looks like little flowers popping out of the grass with my color combo. I love it. So we're going to cut and secure our end. And the last row of this part isn't really a specific stitch, but what we're going to do is we're just going to flatten out the top of the row that we just finished, because you can see that the top of this row is a little bit wavy, and we want it to be more flattened out before we start a new special stitch. So that's what we're going to do next. So you're going to take your new color and you're going to tie into that initial chain 1. So that's what you see me doing here. And then you're going to insert your hook in. Struggling a bit, and pulling a loop through. And you're going to chain 1. And then we are going to be working into the 3rd loop in this row. So you have the front loop right here, the back loop, and then there's a 3rd loop behind that back loop. So that's what we're working into. And we're doing a half double crochet into the 3rd loop. So you're going to do 1, and that lets that braided piece come out, and then a second one into the next stitch. So half double crochet, half double crochet. For the peak of the shell stitch, just to flatten it out, we're only going to do a single crochet in the 3rd loop. And then we'll go back to half double crochets in the 3rd loop. And that's what we're going to do across. So every stitch is going to be a half double crochet in the 3rd loop, except for the middle stitch of the shell stitch, which is the 3rd double crochet of the shell stitch, because you can see right here, it's flattening it out, and that 3rd loop lets you have this pretty like braided effect along the top of the stitch. So again, half double crochet into the 3rd loop because we're working into the granny stitch from the previous row, we're back to the second shell. So half double crochet into the third loop for the first 2 stitches of the shell. And then that middle third stitch of the shell, just because it's the peak, we just don't need as much height if we're flattening it out. So we do just a single crochet. And you can see when I pull back that it's flattening out that wave that the shell and Granny had given. So you're going to repeat that all the way across, and I will meet you at the end. So here we are. Remember, your last shell might not be a perfect 5. Since I had a 4, I'm just going to do a single crochet in the third loop in the middle 2 since I don't have a middle 1, and then go back to doing the half double crochet in the third loop for the last 2 stitches of the row. Again, the purpose of this row is to flatten out the wave from the previous round and use the third loop to kind of give that nice texture and detail to the shells and the granny stitch from the previous row. But now we're just tying and securing our ends, and that is the end of this part. We covered 4 separate stitches or sections. We have 4 left before we need to move on and construct our bag. So we have the waistcoat, the single crochet herringbone, the shell and granny, and then the stitch that flattened it all out on top. So let's take a look. And you have finished 4 more stitches. We have 4 left, and then we will work on constructing the bag. So my plan is to do one more big video with all 4 of those stitches, and then we will do a video over lining your bag and a video over constructing it and adding a handle. So probably 3 more videos and then you'll have a complete bag. But here is what my swatch is looking like now. Again, I am planning on kind of doing my bag like this. So it has kind of a flap over the front and then a pocket. I'm gonna need to block mine a little bit because you can see right here, it's kind of starting to do a little diagonal thing, just to flatten it all out, make it nice and square. But that is what we are working on. As always, if you have any questions, please be sure to drop them below and be sure to tag me in your progress on socials. Thank you so much for following along.